Hi, I'm Gareth Marlowe, and I wanted to talk today about a piece that Elizabeth Eyre wrote recently called Don't Ask Forgiveness, Radiate Intent. And what she's talking about in this article is essentially why it's better to ask forgiveness than to seek permission is a dumb approach to take. I think it's really relevant to some of the discussions over the last few days about the Zoom situation, and I thought it was a fantastic article and typical of Elizabeth. It's intelligent, it's quite provocative, and it's pretty profound. So I've linked to it below, and I'd encourage you to go read it. But what triggered some thoughts in my mind actually on reading it was the connection to giving difficult feedback. So giving difficult feedback is something that I get involved in a lot. So as a coach, often you're helping somebody to think about the things that they need to know. It's not necessarily the stuff that they want to know, but it's the stuff they really need to know. And some of that stuff can be quite hard to deal with. But also as a coach, I'm working with managers and helping to develop their skills so that they can do the same kind of things. They can give difficult feedback. And there's really a lot of fear associated with giving feedback for those managers. So fear that somebody's going to get defensive or upset, or that is going to come back and attack them. And it's fear born from a reasonable place. I mean, all of us, I think, been in those situations where you've gone to have a difficult conversation, and it's just descended into this cycle of indignity or upset or anger. And that drives you as the person who's trying to deliver the message into a place where you're becoming sort of more and more frustrated and self-righteous. And the whole thing kind of spirals down. So why is this relevant to Elizabeth's article? Well, I think the radiating intent bit is a really important concept here. It's not that difficult, actually, when I'm coaching people, for me to deliver some of those messages. And while that might be because I'm some kind of paragon of integrity with amazing skills at doing this, I think actually the reality is much more simple. If I'm coaching somebody, then I've got one job. My motives are clear. My motives are to help them. And even if the message that I'm delivering is hard to hear, it's clear for the person who I'm talking to or I'm helping to understand this stuff that I've got their interests at heart. And I don't think this is the way that things are perceived in the workplace when you're trying to have a difficult conversation, either as a line manager or just with a colleague or a peer. Because essentially, here's how it goes. I come and say the thing, you listen to the thing, you judge that you're being attacked, and when you judge that you're being attacked, the shields go up, the defences rise, and the conversation spirals down. And I think this is really why Elizabeth's article is relevant here, because what's going on is this sort of mismatch of motive. So as the person who's giving the feedback, I'm generally trying to solve a problem. I'm generally trying to advance things. I'm generally trying to help to move things forward. On the receiving end of it, I don't know why we're having this conversation. Am I about to get fired? Am I about to be demoted? Is the project going to be canned? There's all this stuff that's going on, and then you're hearing what's being said to you, and you sort of take it in that context. It's like, it sounds like an attack. Shields up. Defend, defend, defend. So how do we actually radiate intent? Because generally that stuff is not really in the minds of the person who's giving the difficult feedback. How do we radiate the intent? Well, I think there's two ways of going about it. So the first is, generally, if the only conversations that you're having with people are difficult conversations, then clearly the intent of this conversation is going to be another difficult conversation. Whereas actually, if you're spending most of your time in communication with that person, radiating positive positive feedback and positive praise, then when the negative or the constructive stuff comes, it's sitting there within a context. So generally, the best place to come from in terms of radiating that constructive intent is not in that conversation. It's all the stuff they're doing in all of the rest of the time. But the other thing is that when you're actually in that conversation, the way that you structure it really matters, because unless you are signalling your motive at the start of that discussion, essentially the other person is just going to make up those stories from themselves. They're just going to assume that this is a prelude for a telling off at best or a firing at worst, and So, you know, if you can make it clear at the start of that difficult conversation, like, here's my motive. I want us to talk about last month's sales performance, because I don't think it's where it should be, and I want to understand what's going on, and I think there are some things that we can do to make a difference. It might even be more, you know, more acute. I am concerned that with 3 months since you started, that we're coming towards the end of your probation period, and that you're not making the progress that we'd hope for. But what I want to try and do is understand that so that we can get you back on track. So you see that, you know, when you're beginning with your end in mind and you're signalling that at the start of the difficult conversation, you're doing a lot of the legwork necessary to provide the reassurance for that person that, okay, you know, this might be an awkward, difficult conversation that we're having, but, you know, all of these other motives, they're not in play. You know, this is why we're having the conversation, to talk about this thing specifically. So yeah, great, really thought-provoking piece from Elizabeth. Link to it below. Really encourage you to go and read it, but also very interested to think about it in this context of having difficult conversations. Okay, that's it. I'm Gareth, and hopefully see you next time.